Hello everybody and welcome back to Blades, Blood and Spicy Weapons from 40k. You seem to like the last installment that we did of this, so I decided to make this a semi-regularly thing where we're going to be looking into the different weaponry that signifies the galaxy. In this case we're going to be looking into the armory of the servants of the Dark Prince Slaanesh, looking at sonic weapons in particular, as well as a few famous artifacts of She Who Firsts. The story of the Meraviglia is one of the most infamous and pivotal moments in the lore of the Emperor's Children's Legion. You can read the full story in detail in Graham McNeill's Horus Heresy novel Fulcrum, and it serves as a key catalyst for the Legion's full descent into the worship of Slaanesh. In the final years of the Great Crusade, the renowned Terran composer and musician Becker Kinska joined the Emperor's Legion, specifically the Expiatory Fleet, as a remembrancer. She was invited at the personal request of Primarch Fulcrum, who wished that his Astartes and mortal contingent to be exposed to the higher forms of human culture and art. Kinska was already a jaded seeker of ever greater sensations and new auditory experiences, making her highly susceptible to corruption. During the campaign against the Xenos, the Lair, on the world of Larian, Kinska, alongside with other remembrancers, visited a grand temple dedicated to what would later be recognized as Slaanesh. The temple's unearthly harmonies and alien sounds profoundly affected her. Some would call it inspired, and others would call it tainted by what she heard there. She became obsessed with capturing these wondrous yet perverse tones in a single ultimate composition. Kinska spent months in seclusion, composing what she would call the Meraviglia, which in ancient Terran would translate basically into wonderment or marvel. She designed and built entirely new, bizarre musical instruments in her inspired ravings. Strange psychosonic devices with vibrating strings made of exotic and potentially Xenos material, wailing bagpipes crossing foreign notes, and amplification systems that went far beyond conventional orchestras. These inspired pieces of completely new technology would become the prototypes later used to evolve the basis for sonic weapons, to be used by the Emperor's children, known as Noise Marines. Due to her renowned and beloved nature, she had no trouble assembling an entire choir and an orchestra from fellow remembrancers and support staff among the flagship of Fulcrum, which she called home, including the lead singer Coraline Essentia. The Meraviglia was going to premiere in La Finesse, the Remembrancer's opulent lounge and theatre aboard Fulcrum's flagship, the Pride of the Emperor. The audience included the Primarch Fulcrum himself and all available assembled Astartes of the Emperor's children, and even various mortal support personnel and other artists, as Fulcrum believed that the arts were for all to share, even despite of rank and station. The performance began with an overture that started deceptively romantic and energetic, luring in all those who listened. It evoked a natural phenomenon, raindrops chittering lovingly and slowly building into a storm. Wind would start out as little puffs building into hurricanes, and thunder would start far away and ended up deafening. Using conventional elements like harpsichords, trombones, piccolos, and timpani, hard word, amplified through sonic projectors. However, the sinister nature of the performance would build as it progressed, the music growing increasingly discordant, alien, and overwhelming. The new instruments began their role in the display and unleashed cacophonous waves of sound and vibration that were not merely loud but psychosonic, meaning that they stimulated the senses to such extremes as they affected the material body therefore blending pleasure with pain and mixing disorientation with ecstasy. Astartes, whose transhuman biology made them resistant to normal stimuli, found their nerves set ablaze with sensations they had never known, and absolute grotesque and deviant acts were committed by everyone but the truly resolute individuals. The performance escalated into a frenzied orgy of excess and violence. Audience members began tearing at their armor, engaging in acts of violence, lust, and self-mutilation, all while laughing and weeping in ecstatic abandon. The symphony acted as an unintentional, or even perhaps guided, sorcerer's ritual, weakening the gauntlet between the worlds, scratching at interdimensional barriers with each discordant note, and calling into the great warp like a siren's call. The intense harmonics opened a link to the warp, flooding the theater with energy aligned with the nature of the Dark Prince Slaanesh. And, at the crescendo, demonic entities manifested. Kinska's lead singer, Caroline Essentia, was possessed and transformed into a demonette of Slaanesh. This creature ended up killing Kinska herself, clawing her apart in a final ironic act of appreciation for the masterpiece that had summoned it. This was the birth of the sonic technology that would come to blight the universe. It is essentially based in technology, but at the heart of each instrument lies a core of warp energy that continues to sing bits and pieces of the Meraviglia in all of the voices of the universe. This technology has even been altered throughout the ages, and as such, an entire sonic armory has become available to those who would dare wield it. We will start with the framework and just refer to the most simple weapon, which is called a sonic blaster. Resembling a heavy boulder in framework, the weapon fires shots of blasts of discordant sound waves to rupture organs, shatter armor, and overload the senses. The sonic waves create rapid, violent oscillation in the target's molecular structure. This causes the materials such as flesh, bone, armor, and even vehicle plating to resonate at extreme frequencies until it literally tears itself apart. The effect on unarmored and lightly protected organic targets such as guardsmen, cultists, or civilians. The blast can rupture eardrums instantly and burst eyeballs with explosive pressure. Internal organs basically turn liquid and, in the best case, just violently hemorrhage. Skins slough off and fall away in strips from bones as the vibrations shear through tissue, and victims who don't immediately suffer this fate collapse in writhing agony, their bodies vibrating uncontrollably before disintegrating into a wet, pulpy mess of shredded meat and bone fragments, effectively liquidizing. While solid barriers offer a great protection against sonic weapons of this caliber, there are those whose harmonics can propagate through solid barriers and even power armor, making cover less than effective against normal kinetic weaponry. The sonic energy can strip away layers of armored plating through these resonant vibrations, and therefore cracking holes and even causing internal component engines and ammunition stores to fire. Crew compartments can shake themselves to pieces, and those inside of it may be killed by transmitted vibrations, even if the vehicle appears unharmed or not fully destroyed. Just imagine being a tank crew having their organs pulp while the vehicle itself rattles. Producing a sonic weapon in Warhammer 40k is not a standardized industrial process like those of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It's a profane, individualized act of blasphemous craftsmanship performed by corrupted tech marines, dark mechanicum heretics, or even noise marines who themselves has the skill to consider themselves an artificer devoted to Slaanesh. Each weapon is a unique sonic artifact, part musical instrument, part demonic relic, born from the fusion of ancient Xenos technology inspired by the lair and fueled and powered by Imperial power armor and warp-tainted sorcery. There are no factory lines and there are no SDC templates. Each thing is a thing of terrible beauty and terrible uniqueness. Creating such a sonic weapon, while individual, follows a process that I've been trying to extrapolate from lore and my own thoughts. So, in order to create such a thing, you would have to go through a multi-phase ritual of excess vibration and demonic binding. The process would be dangerous, addictive, and often fatal to lesser artisans, and only those already steeped within the blessings of Slaanesh would survive the sensory overload that it would take to create such a thing. It would typically take weeks or months of continuous performance, with the artificer and weapon mutating together in some sort of ecstatic agony. Step 1. Acquisition of the harmonic core and base components. The artisan would begin by scavenging or raiding for a resonance chamber, a special crystal lattice, or a Zenus-derived harmonic amplifier. These would often be salvaged from lair relics. Elder spirit stones are much preferred, and the shattered remains of previous sonic weapons could be used. This would need to be fused with adamantium acquired from designated forges, or recycled from damaged power armor plating, as normal metal will simply not be able to withstand this. Emitter pipes, speaker horns, and modular slides shaped like Baroque music valves are crafted and grown from warp-infused flesh and bone in vats of narcotic ichor, and backpack-mounted power cells tied to the wearer's armor reactor provides the base energy for the initial activation of the weapon. Then comes the ritual. The partially assembled frame is placed in a ritual chamber filled with incense, narcotics, and the screams of captives. A sorcerer or warp-touch heretic performs parts of the Meraviglia that still remains in our world for hours upon hours each and every day, all while the mutilation of slaves are performed in the name of the Prince of Pleasure. If successful, this would open micro-rifts to the warp, allowing demonic essence to seep into the core meant to contain spiritual energy. And I once again point out that Elder Spirit Stones would be perfect here. The weapon begins to vibrate on its own, growing warm and occasionally twitching like living tissue. Failure here results in the artisan's flesh liquefying, although the weapon exploding in a crescendo of lethal feedback. Such a ride would be known to the cacophony, the dark mechanicum, or the flawless toes, and would be known as the invocation ritual. Extrapolated from ancient rites of demonic binding preserved during the Black Crusades and the whispered excesses of the Emperor's children since the fall of the lair. This ritual is no crude corn-forged binding of rage or Nurgle's pestilent infusions. It is a symphony of sensation where pleasure and agony blur until the weapon itself sings with the Dark Prince's voice. The weapon is now more than a tool. It hungers eternally for new screams to add to its repertoire, and when fired, its harmonics carry the Daemon Shard's voice, and when fired, the wielder feels every shot as personal pleasure. Their senses amplify to godlike heights, and over time, due to the warp core and its heart, the weaponry may grow baroque ornamentations like tiny mouths, serpentine tendrils, or crystalline amplifiers that weep intoxicating fluids, expressing the very obsession and malice that is at the heart of the Dark Prince. But of course, at this point, the artificer does not know that he has been successful, other than the fact that he's still alive, and as such, testing would be required. The final testing involves the intended wielder firing upon several bound captives. The weapon must produce the signature effect: molecular disintegration, organ rupture, and overwhelming pleasure pain in the wielder, and as such, a sonic weapon is born. Several types of these sonic weapons already exist, and it can be certain that each of their creations have all manner of variations. What I just went through was basically my 5 cents of how I would think, or if I were to create a story or maybe a TTRPG campaign, how I would designate that such a weapon would be created. But officially there's no canon for it. However, there are some things that do exist and are certain about the sonic weapons. The Blastmaster is a rifle-style sonic cannon with a variable frequency setting. One mode delivers concentrated high-powered blast and the other unleashes rapid-fire waves to disintegrate flesh or overload targets. The weapon builds a deep throbbing bass note in its resonance chamber, then the note is released as an explosive sonic crescendo. The sound is so intense that ground itself trembles and the audible roar can be felt as a physical pressure wave. Blastmasters are typically carried by one or two specialists per Noise Marine squad, providing heavy support fire while the rest of the unit advances with their sonic blasters. They embody the Cacophony's philosophy: war as a performance, destruction as an art. In larger engagements, Blastmasters contribute to the Legion's signature Sonic Storm effect, where overlapping waves from multiple weapons such as these create a literal wall of sound that can drive enemies insane before they even come close to melee. The Doom Siren. This weapon appears as a huge baroque nightmarish arrangement of pipes, tubes, and flared trumpets and resonance chambers. It is typically mounted on the backpack of Chaos Power Armor, with additional tubing snaking around the helmet or integrated directly into the Vox grill and sensory ports of the armor. No Doom Siren is truly alike, but many consist of clusters of ornate organ pipes or a warped loudspeaker system, often adorned with Slaneshi iconography, like serpentine motifs, leering faces, or crystalline amplifiers that shimmer with warp energy. In most devoted members, typically among the Cacophony, the device has been surgically or demonically melded with the wearer's body. Tubes piercing armor and flesh, and the siren is making the wearer so sensitive at the extreme that even the Noise Marine's heartbeat and rapid breathing can feed into activating it, creating a constant low-level hum of discordant sound that only grows when the bearer growls excitedly. The Noise Marine unleashes a war cry, and the siren's pipes and resonators capture it, distorts it, and magnifies it, and this sound is shot out in a focused short-range cone of psychosonic force. Even passive sounds, such as breathing, heartbeats, and the wet sounds of augmented organs, can be amplified into a continuous maddening drone when the weapon is activated. Among the armory of the Dark Prince, there are other famous weapons, where the most well-known would be the Lair Blade. However, I'm gonna give that little thing a video of its own someday. However, that does not mean that the Prince of Pleasure see his servants unarmed, and in fact his weapons are far more elaborate than most of the other gods. The Lash of Torment is a unique and infamous daemon weapon of Slanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, and most famously wielded by Lucius the Eternal, the undying champion of the Emperor's Children Traitor Legion. The lash appear as a long, supple whip crafted from the fused tongues of fiends of Slanesh. The weapon is malevolently sentient, writhing with its own will. It may even twist independently to strike or ensnare its enemies, sometimes seeming to taste the air or caress its wearer in anticipation of bloodshed. Its presence radiates subtle warp energy, often accompanied by faint whispering sighs or the distant echoes of ecstatic screams. In combat, the Lash of Torment strikes with unnatural speed and precision. It can lash out to ensnare foes at reach, its barbed coils wrapping around limbs, weapons, and throats. and once it grips its victims, the hooks rasp and tear flesh from bone in a grinding saw-like motion, while the demonic essence feeds on the target's terror and pain. The agony is not purely physical. The lash telepathically amplifies and broadcasts the victim's sensations, their screams of torment and waves of pleasure, pain, and overwhelming fear to all nearby beings. And for servants of Slaanesh, this shared ecstasy is deeply entertaining and invigorating, heightening their own sensations. And for enemies, it is utterly horrifying, often inducing panic, paralysis, or suicidal despair as they experience the victim's suffering as if it were their own. And then we have the Blissgiver, a slender blade whose lightest touch induces an overwhelming pleasure coma. It appears as a graceful, razor-thin sword or stiletto with a serpentine curve, often adorned with Slaaneshi runes that shimmers in hues of pink, purple, and gold. Victims of this terrible daemon weapon are left insensibly with ecstasy, allowing them to be captured alive for further torment or enjoyment rather than killed outright. It embodies Slaanesh's theme of excess through indulgence. The Blissgiver is commonly wielded by the Emperor's children champions, Chaos Lords and Sorcerers dedicated to the Dark Prince. It suits their dueling perfectionist style of warfare, a weapon for an artist of torment who prefer to intimately kill over the indiscriminate noise of sonic blasters and blastmasters. Wielding any one of these weapons, or any daemon weapon in fact, is a Faustian barking. It offers mortals the powers of the gods on the battlefield, but erodes the bearer's soul over time. And make no mistake, even if Slaaneshi weaponry seems to be utterly focused on causing the suffering around you, these weapons will burn out the wielder to such an extent that the only time they can feel anything is when they're using it. Thank you so much for listening. Was there any specific part of this that you enjoyed, and are there another type of weaponry that you would like for me to look at? Consider subscribing and giving it a like, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.